Welcome everyone to Discover This, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the murder of a 17-year-old girl. The still unsolved murder of a 17-year-old girl from a long time ago. Louise Teuber was born in 1914. I could never find a more specific date than that, but she was born in San Diego to her father William and her mother Eleanor. She had an older sister named Isabel. And when Louise was 2 or 2.5 years old, her mother died suddenly. And her father, along with her grandmother, raised her at this house here on Vermont Street in University Heights. Louise attended San Diego High School, at least until June of 1930. Also in June of 1930, she got a job at Cress's Five and Dime in downtown San Diego on 5th Avenue. On Saturday, April 18th, 1931, Louise walked out of her house and walked down to University Avenue and caught the streetcar to 5th Avenue, and then caught another streetcar down 5th Avenue to her job. She had left her father a note that said, "Dear Dad, I have tried for a long time to be satisfied with the way you are running the house, and I can stand it no longer. I am leaving home tonight and I am not coming back." Louise and her father had argued a couple nights before because he was trying to restrict her to the house. He didn't like her going out all the time and with all her friends, and she had a lot of different male dates. Louise and her friends would go out roller skating to Mission Beach, go to the movies, go to the beach, go dancing at various dance halls, and sometimes they would go up an unmarked road off of Mission Gorge Road to a secluded spot under some oak trees. At the end of her shift that day at Cress's, on April 18th, she quit her job, and they paid her wages. None of her coworkers seemed to remember how Louise left work that day, whether she caught the streetcar or a friend came and picked her up in her car. Louise had also written her sister a letter saying basically not to worry, that she just couldn't stay here anymore. So this is Mission Gorge Road in San Diego, as it is today. 3 lanes each direction. But back in 1931, Mission Gorge Road was a 2-lane cement road that left San Diego that way and headed east. And this was all rural. No houses, apartments, shops, nothing out here. Totally rural. In fact, some people called this the mountains. See that mountain right there? Today it's called Cowles Mountain, or it's actually pronounced Coles Mountain. But back in 1931, that was Black Mountain. And in the late 20s and early 30s, students from San Diego State would paint a big white S on that mountain. So it was known as S Mountain for many years, all the way into the 70s. But this was the Black Mountain area. On Sunday, April 19th, 1931, Antonio Martinez gathered his family up at their house in Lemon Grove. They got in the car and they started heading east on Mission Gorge Road. And they turned off onto Black Mountain Road and then onto an unpaved, unmarked road, looking for a good picnic spot. And they pulled into an area that had a large grove of oak trees. So once Mr. Martinez found a good parking spot, the family got out of the car and started looking for a good picnic area. And almost immediately, Antonio Martinez saw something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. He saw the body of a nude young woman hanging from an oak tree. So he gathered up the family, they got back in the car, and they drove to the nearest payphone, and he called the sheriff, whose jurisdiction this was at the time. So the deputies arrived, some San Diego police officers arrived, and actually the chief of police of La Mesa arrived, all to try and start investigating what happened to this young woman. When they got here, they could tell that underneath her was an old army blanket, and she was hanging so that the bottom portion of her legs and her feet were actually on the ground. And Right next to her, they found all of her clothes were very neatly folded and sitting on the ground. So after taking pictures and examining the scene, they cut her down from the tree and they took her body to a mortuary in La Mesa for identification. So they brought the body here to Erickson Anderson Mortuary, 8390 Allison in La Mesa. And if you remember the neatly folded clothes that were kind of next to the body, well, they went through those clothes, and in the pockets they found a piece of paper that had addresses, and there was 3 addresses for guys and 1 address for a girl. And so the police went and tried to track down these folks, and they found the girl, so they brought her here to identify the body. And she identified the body as that of Louise Teuber. Now, she knew that because they were co-workers at Cress, or they had been, because Louise had just quit, but they were co-workers at Cress. So the coroner does an autopsy and finds skin under her nails. Her neck was not broken, so she did not die from the hanging. The blow to the head must have stunned her. It didn't kill her, but probably knocked her out maybe. But she did die of strangulation, not from the noose, but from somebody's hands. The coroner determined that she had been dead for about 7 to 8 hours by the time Mr. Martinez found her. And they still couldn't figure out whether she was killed there or brought to that location and the thing was staged. So the crime scene photos are fairly graphic, so I'm blocking out certain parts. But this area is now part of Mission Trails Regional Park, and the crime scene is actually just 100 yards or so from the visitor center there. The knot on the noose was determined to be a maritime type of knot, although later some people with maritime experience, sailors and things, said that it was more of a construction type knot used for a block and tackle. But either way, this is the scene that the Martinez family found, and you can see the investigators, again, from the Sheriff's Department, the San Diego Police Department, all trying to figure out what happened to this young girl. So now authorities started interviewing anyone known to Louise, co-workers, students, boyfriends. By April 20th, they had already interviewed over 20 people. They ended up focusing on a neighbor of the Teubers, an ex-Navy man by the name of Herman Newby. See, Newby fancied himself a photographer, and he would photograph just about anything, including young girls, sometimes in various stages of dress or undress. When the police searched Newby's house, they found nude photos of Louise Teuber. See, Newby had started photographing her when she was 16, so just basically a year earlier. These were particular photos that they found were taken at a cabin. The Newby family, he had a wife and kids. Anyway, a cabin they had in Whispering Pines, which is just outside of Julian, California, up in the mountains of San Diego County. When Louise's father finally saw the photos, he knew they were taken on her 16th birthday, which she had gone up to the Whispering Pines cabin with the Newbys to celebrate. Newby was arrested for violations of the morals code for those photos and for other young girls and women whose photographs they found. Newby's wife paid his $500 bail, and he got out of jail. When he was asked for his whereabouts the night of April 18th, he said he and his wife had driven up to Whispering Pines to the cabin and come home very late at night or early morning. His wife backed up those claims, and the police kind of left it at that. The police had been able to confirm Louise's whereabouts for up to 7 p.m. on April 18th, but after 7 p.m. they couldn't track her at all. So police started looking elsewhere, since Newby's wife had basically verified his alibi. Newby was sentenced to 6 months in jail, and after he served his time, which his wife divorced him while he was in jail, he moved to Arkansas. Now, another potential suspect they focused on was a guy named John Parciano. He came to their attention because within days of Louise's murder, he hung himself in a San Mateo cemetery using a very similar knot as the one found on Louise's noose. He also had scratches all over his face, and he may have been in San Diego when Louise died. Now, less than a week after Parciano's suicide, a man approached a worker at the Park Manor Hotel at 5th and Spruce in Bankers Hill area of San Diego and asked about mailing a letter. The worker said there was a mail drop inside the hotel and offered to drop it for the man, who accepted the offer. As the worker was going to the mail drop, he noticed that the letter was addressed to the San Diego police and the coroner's office. So he called the police, who came and got the letter. When they opened it, the letter stated, without any proof, that the police were focusing on the wrong man and that the murderer of Louise Teuber was John Parciano. Investigators at the time couldn't decide whether the letter was a crank or someone was trying to throw them off, but they didn't take the John Parciano theory very seriously. So we're at the Mission Trails Visitor Center. This is now City of San Diego area, no longer the Sheriff's Department, no longer rural East County. And then you can see Mission Gorge Road as it is now off in the distance. And police believed you could have probably seen Louise's body hanging from the tree from Mission Gorge Road, that 2-lane cement road at the time. So they believed that whoever put her there, or whoever brought her there, left her there so she'd be found right away. The memorial service for Louise Teuber was held here at the Merkley Mortuary at 3655 5th Avenue in Hillcrest, which was this building at the time. The reason Louise's father picked this mortuary was because this is where her mother's memorial service was. Shortly after the memorial service, Louise was cremated and taken to the cemetery. And after her funeral service, Louise was laid to rest here at Greenwood Memorial Cemetery in San Diego. Right next to her mother and father. Notice her father died 2 years after she did. This is still an unsolved homicide. Now, in the years after Herman Newby had moved to Arkansas, he remarried and had children from that marriage. Later, it was claimed that Newby had sexually assaulted his daughter, physically abused his wife and sons. He was believed to have had a very violent temper. There are still some who believe that Herman Newby is the person who killed Louise Teuber. Louise's father always believed it was Newby. Whether he was having her pose for photos and it went wrong, whether she was posing for photos willingly somewhere else and was killed and brought to that place where she was hung, we'll probably never know. There were tire tracks found at the scene and documented, but without a suspect to compare tires on their car to, just something else sitting in the file. Including Louise, there were 4 murders of women and young girls in the spring of 1931. Not all were killed in the same manner. Some were mutilated and violated, some weren't. Authorities didn't believe they were all connected. They were done by the same killer, although maybe a couple were. So that's going to do it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the story of Louise Teuber and her murder, still unsolved today. Very unfortunate. You know, today we have DNA and all sorts of different things we can look at, but back then they just didn't. So unfortunately, she'll probably never be solved. But I appreciate you watching this video. I appreciate you taking the time. I thank you for checking out the other videos. And there's a lot more to come. And we will see you next time on Discover This.